In this episode, we talk about the resilience for adversity and how this is a testament to what David has achieved. The role NLP had in his mental transformation. And we talked about the difference between motivation and drive, and the power of humor can have with healing. Welcome to Man Quest Define Meaning, where we help men navigate modern life, find their true purpose, and redefine manhood. I'm your host, James, and each week, inspiring guests share their journeys of overcoming fear, embracing vulnerability, and finding success. From experts to everyday heroes, get practical advice and powerful insights. Struggling with career, relationships, or personal growth? We've got you covered. Join us on Man Quest Define Meaning. Now, let's dive in. I'm hard to kill. Good morning, David. Can you explain that statement?
Yes, it's a long story, really, because I've written a book about it. It's about my journey through life, having a lot of bad luck. I race bikes, push bike, cycling, elite level, competing at top level with Commonwealth Games, World Championships, that sort of level. But it's been a roller coaster ride to get there. And the crashes that I've had have been quite horrific. Somebody asked me what it's like to crash at 45, 50 mile an hour. And I said, basically, we're dressed up in Lycra. There's not a lot of protection. So if you can imagine getting in your car, get up to in a pair of shorts and a T-shirt, and then get up to 50 mile an hour and chucking yourself out, and that's what it feels like, if you could imagine that. So hard to kill. I've come back from, as I said, some horrific accidents and even surgery, open heart surgery, which is one of my books, Broken Heart, was about, and the recovery. So I've had more bad luck and life-threatening moments than I've had success in my cycling. But however, that doesn't mean I didn't have success, because I did. No.
What you just said there brings back a childhood memory where basically I think I just finished school. I'd gone out of school, was with my brother on the bike in our village where we were at the time. And I was driving around with my I think it was a hot summer day, my shirt open, and I came off my bike and went down the road on my stomach. And I remember the whole of my stomach was bleeding, was grazed, and I'd all grit everywhere. And I remember being in tears and having to go to first a bath of Dettol, which was painful as hell, then to hospital to go and get sorted.
I don't think unless you've experienced serious road rash, nobody would understand the pain, especially you jumping in the bath with Dettol, following the sort of thing they wouldn't do nowadays. But it's a similar story with me. In fact, we used to have a badge of honour that when we crashed, there'd be a horrific burns. We'd put iodine on it. You know, it's a good idea because it's a good disinfectant, but it used to burn like hell. But like I said, it was a badge of honour. When you turned up at a race, you had this big orangey brown leg and then your scar all around it. But it's just one of those things you did as a youngster.
It's like the old days where they got some whiskey, poured it over a wound, like bite onto the stick.
Yes, the one. Yeah, hang in there. I had that once in Canada when I had a crash in the Commonwealth Games. They thought that I ruptured my spleen and I had to go in there, and because if I had that, the spleen had to come out. But the process of digging in through the stomach to get to the spleen was quite painful. And I remember this Canadian nurse said, hold my hand, and I squeezed it and then broke it. What you're saying. And she was going, hang on in there, breaking her hand because it was so painful. But there you go. You get used to immune to pain. I don't know if it sounds crazy, but when you've had a lot of pain in your life, as much as you don't like it, and I don't want to boast about it, but you get immune to live with it. Just get on with it. And getting on with it with pain takes a special breed of bastard, because some people couldn't do it and some people can.
I suppose it depends what kind of pain, because obviously you've got the physical pain, which you probably go through quite a lot coming off your bikes. But then if you think of relationships, it's the emotional pain of going through lots of breakups.
You're not wrong. I've been through 2 divorces. I'm on my 3rd wife, my current addition. Lovely girl, Tracy. But the emotional breakdown, as you said there, that's a different type of pain. Emotional thinking and feelings can lead you astray. In fact, there was a book by Dr. Stephen Peters called The Chimp Paradox. And it explains in simple terms that the chimp is an emotional thought, takes over your brain, and it gives you, because it's being threatened, and that's why you think negative or aggressive. As an example, you might have an argument with someone and really you might end up in a fight, or you might have some verbal contact, and then when everything calms down, you say, I wish I hadn't have done, because the emotional thinking has brought out the bad in you. And it only takes a few moments with practice to calm that down and get the human brain to think logically and say, hang on, and think it through rather than go steaming in. So interesting concept, emotional thinking, and how to not control it. You've got to manage it. It's a difference, which we can come to maybe later on with NLP and stuff that I've studied in the past.
Now, this is a nice point, really. Can you tell us, what is your story?
My story goes back from being bullied as a child. My dad teaching me how to fight, and then I become Punch Up Dave all of a sudden. And I'm a Leo. I'm a natural leader. I'm not boasting. It just happened. I like to be in charge, and it's not necessarily other people but myself. But unbeknown to me, my real story goes back to a lot of dark thoughts. I was haunted by, like trying to destroy myself. For instance, if I was up a high building, I had this urge to jump. Or if I used to go train spotting as a kid, and I had this thought, what it would be like to jump in front of a train. I never went through the process. It's just these urges. But these urges went through my life at the back of my mind. And I was a very crazy teenager when I learned to drive. At the age of 15, I had a license because I learned to drive in New Zealand. One of the crazy things I would do was to drive on the opposite side of the road and play chicken with the car coming towards me. And I wouldn't bottle it. And the other car would just stop or pull over. How crazy is that? Went deeper because when I started racing, I got overly nervous to the point that I was ill. And I had to understand what was going on. And I was on like self-destruct, if that makes sense. Because I was so nervous, I peaked and trained so hard for this one particular race, only to lose sleep and be overly nervous. It's good to be nervous, but not at this state. And I was on self-destruct. And it took me 60 odd years to combat this. And I eventually got there, and I understood why I thought the thoughts I did. And the trouble with anything that's emotionally attached, when people try and control it, for instance, you say, I don't want to try and stop it. That's not the way to do it. It's like telling somebody hysterically going mad to calm down. That's not going to work. So you've got to manage it, which is a different process. Managing it is going with it. So understanding, if I'm nervous, this might sound a bit nuts, but I tried to literally make myself more nervous. I know that sounds crazy, but the barriers come down because I wasn't challenging it anymore. And it made a huge difference in my outlook towards not just my cycling, but my life. It moved me on a lot.
Anyway, why we're at this point here, let's discuss that. Because you're right. When you try to control or push away or hide from an emotion, or whatever's going on in your life, it never works. It just comes back twice as hard. Yeah. But as soon as you accept it for what it is, and you roll with it, and you even feel it, it just seems to disappear. That's my own perspective, my own idea of dealing with emotions myself.
100%. My words would be embrace your fear. A lot of fear is in denial because you're trying to push it away, don't think about it, that sort of mentality because it upsets you, or you challenge it and get more upset. But what you're not dealing with is the source of the issue. And I think if you embrace it and own that fear, and work out that the coping strategy that you're using is not working, and you need to change the record and figure out another strategy of coping. And that's how it is. You can only really do that by embracing it, confronting it, rather than try and pushing it away.
Yeah, almost making friends of it.
Yeah, exactly that.
And I think I know, because the reason I started this podcast was really to help people where I was 10 years ago. And at that point, where I've gone through a breakup, I was in quite an emotional turmoil at the time. But after, it took me many years, not quite as many as yourself, but it took me many years to realize that rather than trying to hide from anxiety, depression, or grief's a big one. Grief is a big one. It's almost going with it, almost allowing yourself to feel that emotion and to almost acknowledge where you've come from and how far you've gone at the same time.
It is. And by acknowledging it and accepting it, you've removed the denial or the challenge that you're trying to, because nobody wants to be in anxiety. When I worked with a guy a few years ago that suffered with depression, and I listened to his story and I said, you know what, that's an achievement. And he looked at me and says, what do you mean achievement? I said, an achievement is being good at something. And I said, you're good at being depressed. Now, just by saying that, lowered the barriers, because he hadn't thought of that. He hadn't thought that being depressed was actually an achievement. And I went on to say that what other achievements he's had in life. And he's got a PhD, he's been a successful rower, also he's got a lovely wife and kids and stuff like that. But he suffered from depression from something that happened in his life. So I went further and says, if you want to be better at being depressed, I think you need to be more depressed. How many hours do you spend being depressed? And he said, I don't know. I said, let's bump up the volume. When you studied for a PhD, was you studying, 2-3 hours a day? Is it probably between 4 and 6 or 8 hours a day? I said, being depressed, you could actually double that figure if you wanted to, and you'd be more successful in your achievement. And he went, I didn't think about that. And I said, where do you want, if you had to list your achievements, where do you want to be? Do you want your depression to be up there in your top, the things that you've achieved in life? Long story short, just a simple discussion reframed the way he thought about depression. He was fighting it. I was encouraging him to go along with it. I was encouraging him to get more practice in of being more depressed. And it was I must admit, I was walking a very thin line here. I'm not a doctor. I'm an NLP practitioner, and I'm trying to help this guy and reframe him. But he eventually gradually came off his depression tablets, stopped seeing his counsellor, and his mind was just reframed, and he had a different outlook in life. And he got better. And it's a simple thing of not pushing something, not trying to push it away and challenging it, to go with it.
What do you have any particular methods that you use for yourself personally?
I'm a different case, both medically. I've got rheumatoid arthritis, and my blood test showed false positive, all sorts of things that have come up, even my heart problems when I had surgery. It's very difficult to understand how it works with me, because I'm very different, but we're all different. And managing different people with different problems, there's no one thing that works for everything. You have to go with the personality and the understanding of how that's going to be achieved. And with me, it's my sense of humour. Really is. When I had open heart surgery, that's another story getting there, but basically I was in denial. I did admit that, but when I came out of it, it was real. My chest had been split open. My heart had been stopped. I was on a life support machine because they collapse your lungs, stop your heart so they can work on a dry zone, fix your heart, so you're all back up again. and you wake up a different person. You're completely deconditioned. You've got no memory, muscle memory of all the things that you've done in training on bikes and walking. You've got to relearn everything. And the struggle I had to combat this, I could have gone down two different ways. A depressive mode, could have taken drugs or alcohol, or I could have used my tool, which was my sense of humor. And what I did, I made all these crazy videos that went online. I was walking around in a field in a pair of budgie smugglers with snorkels and flippers, and I was just talking and showing the view of where in the fields. And then I turned the camera on myself, and it saw my scar. And I was trying to explain that I'm having a good day. I'm out walking. That following evening, I was in hospital with pneumonia, and that cost me. I went on to make more videos. I wasn't beat. I did the flower arranging. I did the Grim Reaper, all for pretending to fall off my bike. They were all hilariously funny. My wife didn't understand it. She said, "Why are you doing this? You're not." I was telling everyone I was fine, and I was making a complete idiot of myself. But that's how I got through it. And this is why I say we're all different. My sense of humour I use as a tool. And I must admit, it worked, as crazy as it was. And it made a lot of people happy as well.
I'm not surprised, because I was chatting to a guy last week. In fact, his podcast comes out this week. And he talks about how fear tells lies. And one of his superpowers is humor. And he's a poet. He goes into kids' schools, talks about fear telling lies. And he uses humor in a way to help people.
Exactly that. And it's like I just mentioned on one of my cases, I helped the guy with depression. That was a little bit of humour in there with the achievement thing. It made him smile anyway. But sense of humour is a good tool. Provided, though, some people aren't connect with someone, you've got to mirror them. And some people have not got a sense of humour. It's not a fault. It's just the way they are programmed. So you have to do it in a completely different way.
So let's go back. You mentioned about in your life how you went on this kind of escapade. The escapade, we call it? No. You went through a period of suicidal thoughts and that kind of thing. How did you get from there to becoming world champion cyclist?
I had some good days. It wasn't all doom and gloom. There were some days that worked, and I managed to manage my nerves, but quite often there wasn't. And how I got there eventually took a long time, because even though I'd won 25 odd World Masters cycling championships, I also lost a few and all because of that. So it's like anyone that's successful. You learn from failure to be successful. You can't just be successful. You have to make a lot of cock-ups or bad times to move on. Because I'm what I am, it took me a lot longer than normal to actually realise that all I had to do was to go with it. And I even thought of one of the pressures, to try and manage the pressure was the key. The key is the pressure. And it's always the same thing. You're looking at the outcome and not the process. So when I'm racing, I'm probably focusing on winning. People are coming up to me, "You're going to win today, Dave." That doesn't help. That's immediately put pressure on me. But they're being nice and kind. But in my brain, that's putting more pressure. And I'm focusing on standing on a podium with a gold medal, with a jersey like that, saying I'm going to be world champion. I'm trying to block it out. So I had this new technique that I worked with myself. Apart from the fact that I tried to make myself more nervous, I dealt with the process more than I blocked the outcome out. The outcome will take care of itself. And if I was doing a 2-lap sprint at 500 meters, I would tell myself, it doesn't matter where I come, doesn't matter if I don't make the podium. But as long as I can't stand up after I finish, job done. And if I've delivered and emptied my tank and somebody beat me, I'd be happy with that and I'll be first to shake their hand. But the thought process there wasn't the outcome. It was definitely the process. And that's what drove me. And I wish I knew that when I was younger, when I was at my prime.
How did you block the outcome? What did you, is there anything you specifically did to block the outcome? It's quite a hard thing.
Not, it was, but visualization, for instance, when the damage is done psychologically, it puts doubt in your mind, and that can escalate. You can turn up at a race or a meeting or wherever you're going to be that's got some pressure and very, very focused, very positive, and all of a sudden this single thought can just knock you out because it's starting to put doubt in your mind. So to overcome that, I use visualization. So if I even thought about it, I would just sit down with a towel over my head so I wouldn't be distracted by anyone. And I would go through the process of warming up and then getting on my bike, doing the final little bike checks, preparing for the race, doing the race, that sort of thing. And what I was doing there, I was actually managing my conscious mind. There's no subconscious mind interfering. And I held that. And then together with the process of dealing with, I don't care where I come sort of attitude, I'm just going to smash myself to bits. And if I can't stand up afterwards, that single thought inspired me. But the key is timing. Because if you did this an hour before the race, you're going to be a nervous wreck. With practice, it's the sort of thing that I could do within a minute or even 30 seconds. I can take my bad day with bad attitude and nerves to the bike, and then all of a sudden I can hit my anchor and spark up, and I'm a god. And practice. But it took a long time to learn that.
Yeah. Well, that reminds me that the other, which day was it? Monday. So I am a member of, I do CrossFit weekly, and we're doing 1 rep max shoulder press. And mine at the moment, 63.575, something like that. And I went in to do 60, so I'm building up again. It's a new day. And I knocked 60 out, and bang, straight up. And I thought to myself, this is easy. I'm going to go for 70. It's a massive jump. So I didn't do 70, couldn't do 70. And then suddenly, because I couldn't do 70, that blocked me from doing 65, and it blocked me from going higher than my 1 rep max.
Yeah. And that definitely is mind over matter, isn't it? Where the subconscious will just doubt you, and then if you're not careful, you go on a downward spiral.
Yeah. Yeah, so the key lesson for me there was to, rather than get cocky and let your ego take over and just go straight for 70, just go for 63.5 again, and then build it up. Do that one, easy, then do the next one. That way you're building yourself back up rather than going from high to low.
Yeah, so that's my point about looking at the outcome and not dealing with the process. Exactly that. And you're right, the gradual increase as well would have got you up there, probably. So the mind is so powerful, it can make or break you. It can destroy you or make you the happiest person in the world. And it's just understanding the coping mechanism of how you dealt with it. And when you're young, you don't know all this stuff. You just get on with it. I crash on my bike, I hurt myself, and I just get up again, despite the damage that I'd done, that I'm going to pay for later in life, which I am now. So, yeah.
To become a world champion cyclist, is obviously, that's no small feat. That is a massive. What did you have to do in order to get yourself there?
I've been cycling for racing 50 odd years. So there was a progression in that anyway. I've raced at international level as a youngster, and I turned professional. Then I took up running marathons, and then I went back to cycling and started doing masters racing, which I started to become world champion in. But all the ingredients and knowledge of my experience helped me a lot. Experience does count when you're riding at that level, but something within me and people that are driven, that It's like Rocky would say, it's not how many times you get knocked down, it's how many times you get back up. And I actually did a podcast a few years ago about what's the difference between being motivated and being driven. Because they're similar, but there is a big difference. Somebody that's just motivated can be demotivated immediately with some bad news, and it can destroy them or take a while to get over it. Somebody that's driven would have the same effect at first, but they'd bounce back because they don't know how to not bounce back. They keep going forward. However, being driven can also be your worst enemy, because it has with me. I think I'm driven. That's what's kept me going to win those world titles. But being driven can be my enemy too, because, for instance, it can destroy you, in the sense that when I was recovering from major surgery, being driven means that I'm going to get over this. I'm not listening to the rules. As one doctor said, that I'm there and I'm up here on the top of the building, and I need to come back down to the first floor, because being driven was actually another self-destruct. I was like, I'm not playing the rules here. So it didn't work. So that can be a self-destruct as well as being a good thing. It works both ways. Understanding it helps. My recent back surgery, I'm not programmed to do not a lot, but I've had to get a grip with calming myself down, because I don't want to go, I'm too old to go through another big surgery like this. And I don't like hospital food.
So let's just cover this point quickly then. Obviously, you mentioned that you've got to try and bring yourself down a little bit and become a bit less driven. How are you coping with that at this moment in time? Is there anything you specifically do?
I've trained myself. I've got various tools to help me that they've given me. They've given me what they call a perching chair, so that if I'm trying to bench to do some vegetables rather than standing up and do them, I can sit down. I've got a grabber that I use at extending, and I've got into a routine that I've trained myself that I'm not going to pick up that thing off the floor, because that's the worst thing I can do is bend down. I'm not ready to bend down yet. So I use my grabber, and it's become a habit. So it's relearning, if you like, a routine, a new routine that's not going to be forever, but it's going to be the start of the rehab. And then when you move on, you create a new routine. The danger point always in any injury is when you turn the corner and you feel better, because there's a while where you struggle and then you start gradually getting better, but you will turn a corner and all of a sudden you're starting to feel okay. But that's dangerous, because that's not a green light. That's just telling you that you're at the next level. You can gradually, like you should have done, gradually improve the weight a little bit more and a little bit more. And it's so easy to get the green light thinking I'm fine and then get back into it and then make it worse and go back to square one because you shouldn't have done that.
Yeah, I relate to that, because with injuring myself, my back, pulling my back, and then perhaps 3 or 4 days later, it's feeling better. Let's jump straight back into CrossFit. And then probably a couple of days later, oh no, I've done it again.
Shouldn't have done that.
Yeah, I can definitely relate. Yeah, so can you go a bit more into motivation and being more driven? Because I think there's going to be people out there who probably have both, and it's probably going to be people who perhaps have more motivation and drive. Is there any way that somebody could become more driven?
Yeah, it depends on, especially with men, their ego, isn't it? That's a big deal, ego. And a lot of problems are if your ego is too big or you're overconfident. And that's where there could be a pitfall in being driven. And then you become cocky. And so understanding that, I remember when I was at my peak, I was racing all around the country and all around Europe, and I never lost a sprint. I never lost. And until this one day, I was riding this guy, a good friend of mine, Neville, and I could beat him quite easy. No disrespect to him. He wasn't a sprinter really, but when he went, he took off. I let him go. And I was waving to the crowd and they said, I'm going to go now. And I went to chase him. I never caught him. Lesson learned. I regret that, but it actually gave me, whoever I was riding with, I respect them. Doesn't matter what ability. They're doing their best. I got cocky and I thought I can win this. That was my ego. And that's where, if you got an understanding about that, and with other people too, you find Donald Trump's ego. Can you imagine that?
Yeah, it's almost like you need a little bit of humility and compassion for your opponents, or not even opponents. It could be anybody that you're up against.
Yeah, it's respect, without a doubt, even if he's the worst nightmare. Unless he's going back to embracing that, reversing the situation of not hating them, embrace it and love them. That's weird. But it does actually stop your ego from running away from yourself. And that's the issue, isn't it? And we've all done it, not even now and again, even though I've calmed down and I know what I know. Occasionally, my wife reminds me about my ego sometimes. And it happens. We're human. It does happen.
So one of our mutual friends who actually put us in contact, Kane Latham, I'm sure he mentioned you in the podcast about yourself racing and going through, is it a period of perhaps not being almost top of your game, but you're eating what you want, doing what you want, and then he came in, stepped in, did a bit of NLP training with you, and it completely transformed you. Can you talk about that, please?
Yeah. It wasn't just the diet. I was on a rubbish diet. I could eat fish and chips, cakes and biscuits. In fact, when I saw Kane, he said, "What do you have for breakfast?" I said, "A cup of coffee and 2 digested biscuits." And he really fell off. Yeah. But it went a bit deeper than that, because even going back to my nerves, I said I was really worried about my nerves. I put myself under so much pressure. And without boasting, because I was that good, I knew I was capable of coming home with a gold medal. But that wasn't doing my mind any good, because that was giving me this pressure that I didn't need. I look around at all my opponents and they're smiling and they're chilled out, and I'm there and I'm all tensed and wound up, and I'm thinking, why can't I be like them? And a friend of mine recommended Kane to go, and he said, why don't you try NLP? And that's neuro-linguistic programming. It's a kind of a reframing thing on the way you behave and understanding it and reframing it, a bit like half full, half empty. It's the same thing. You reframe that half full, half empty glass. And there's different various techniques. And when I saw Kane, we went through it. He asked me how I'd like to behave. Now, that's the key thing. It's not, he came into my world. He didn't say, oh, you need to snap out of that and do this. When you're working with something, Kane worked with me and he entered my world. He entered my world of eating digested biscuits. He entered my world of nerves, and he went with it and he mirrored it. And then he started to restructure it, reframe it in a point that, as I said, that I could take my bad energy thoughts and stuff and be on the start line and become a god. And that was mainly through NLP. And with the process of Kane getting me into the way that I wanted to behave, how would I want to behave? I wanted to be calm, a little bit nervous. I wanted to be able to manage my thoughts and manage my feelings. He talked me into how I would want to do that. He's not telling me to do it. He's asking me how I would like to do it. And so I was actually, without realizing, installing my own anchor in the thought that this is how I'd like to behave. Eventually, he installed an anchor. And an anchor is a trigger. I don't know if you're a rugby fan, but do you remember Johnny Wilkinson? He used to kick goals for England, and he used to do that. Right. And that's NLP. That's his anchor. And what that is 2 rugby posts. And when he was being helped with NLP, one of the strategies was taught to him that he had to imagine that the rugby posts were like 100 metres apart. And then he said, go and kick a ball. And he couldn't miss. And when he did it 1,000 times or whatever, he said, anchor it. And he come up with this anchor. And it's by association of that, of him not missing. And if you recall, he would go sideways, even though the goal was in front of him. And that's him in the zone. The goal was over there. And then he would kick the ball and walk away, knowing that 9 out of 10 he'd kick it. That's NLP for you. It's a trigger. He actually reframed how he thought about the pressure of kicking a ball and used a trigger, an anchor to use. And that's what Kane did to me. He installed an anchor. So on this particular occasion, I was off to Australia to ride the World Masters. And I come back with 2 golds. And I used my anchor. In fact, I phoned a mate up in the middle of the night because we're opposite time zones. And I was up for a race and I rang my mate up and I said to him, this NLP don't work. I'm still he said, Dave, you can't think about suddenly, he said, just go with the flow and hit your anchor. You can't just suddenly make yourself better. And that's what I learned with NLP. You can't, once you've hit that anchor, you don't focus on it's going to work. You just have to forget it because it's by association. And understanding that more, if I was to explain that to somebody that doesn't understand that NLP technique, is if you smell something, you can could be an anchor, a trigger to take you back to something that you've smelled in the past that you liked or hated. Or if you hear music, you hear a track of music that went back a few years and you're there. And that's a trigger. So it's the same thing that NLP practitioner can install an anchor. We've got loads of anchors anyway installed through life.
Yeah. So when I wake up first thing in the morning, I suppose my anchor is to go downstairs and do my morning routine. Is that right?
Sign that says wake up and be awesome.
Is it an anchor is something that triggers a specific action, I assume?
Triggers a body behavior.
Okay.
So if you're shy, you're going to be withdrawn. The way your body behaves, and you don't want to be up the front, you want to be at the back, out of the way, because you are shy. Somebody that's opposite would be right at the front. This is me, here I am, and he wants to be centre of attraction. So yes.
So it's almost similar to habit formation, where you've got some kind of thing that you do, whether, if I remember rightly, that's an anchor point, isn't it? Touching my thumb and finger together, I think. I remember David Heiner, a speaker I know close to me, he uses that quite a lot.
Yeah. I don't even know this famous cyclist, Chris Hoy, when he was on the start line, he used to do this with his glasses. And that was his anchor. And everyone's got a different anchor. It hasn't got to be that, but that's by association.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So basically what Kane did was to get into your head by acting what you did, and then allowing you to dictate how you want your anchor to be, and then instilling those behaviors and thoughts into you personally.
Yeah, it was going through that thought process, but on a repetitive way. So if I was imagining I want to turn up at a race, I want to be calm but in control. I don't want to let my feelings run away from me. And I want to warm up. And most of all, with anything, I want to enjoy it, because I never used to enjoy it. I hate it because of the mess I got in. So all going through all these processes of how I'd like to behave. And Kane would say, let's do that again. And he'd make me repeat it over and over again, but make it better, that I arrived really calm and I really look forward to it. And I was going to have a great time. And he magnified it to a point that he said, right, now hit your anchor. So my anchor was actually that. So when I hit my anchor, that was associated to the way I wanted to behave. So this is me managing me, not controlling me, because it just takes a simple gesture. And sometimes it's very subtle. You wouldn't even know somebody's doing it because it's a personal thing.
Yeah, yeah. So let's use an example. Say there's somebody who's very nervous around people, has massive social anxiety, but they want to be confident. How would they use NLP and instill an anchor?
They could go in there and fart. That sounds bonkers, but it's going to make everyone laugh and it breaks the ice. This is where sense of humour comes in. It's an understanding. I don't mean that necessarily, by the way. I'm just getting you to understand that sometimes your sense of humour can be a good tool. Because they're anxious, they're very tight, they're closed. You've got to open them up and get them to chill. And again, understanding visualisation of easy, going back to how would you like to behave? And they're obviously going to come out and say, I'd like to be confident. I don't want to be shy. Tell me about it. How would you like to behave? And there's various techniques that NLP can use. And it depends on, for instance, we all have different ways of processing our thoughts. So with me, I'm not very visual. If you said to me, can you remember that last race and think about, and I can't actually roll it through my mind, but I can hear the bell going, I can hear the crowd cheering, I can smell the embarkation. So I would use a different technique to somebody that's visual. So for instance, if I said to you, what colour is your front door? What is blue? Okay. And did you notice you looked up to the left? And IQs are a very good thing. When you look up, you're actually searching for what you can remember, right? And it changes from left to right, different people. If you look up to the left, for instance, that's your instant, I know that. And if you look the other way up, that's, I know that, I'm trying to figure out what. So just thinking about it, okay? And then you got the eyes that go backwards and forwards, or you can shake your head. That's trying to connect with audio, trying to connect with what you can hear, as well as looking up. Because, some people, when they go like this, I don't know, right? Unbeknown to them, they're trying to think about it, as well as trying to pick up some sort of other senses. And then it gets more interesting when you start looking down. You're starting to talk to yourself because you don't know the answer. And that's where people lie or they're in denial. So getting to understand, when I'm talking to people, I would look at their eyes as well to see what they're processing and see if they're not so much telling lies, but seeing how they behave. Because you ask just basic questions, how you going, what's going on in your life. And all these IQs are giving me an idea of the person and how to deal with it. So if you was visual, a good example of working that experience is taking them to the cinema. It's one of my favourite hypnosis sessions I deal with some people. And what that is when I say hypnotise, is you're just getting somebody in a very calm, there's lots of levels of hypnosis. We're not going through rooms and going into another room and turning into a chicken. We're just getting them into a relaxed state and being perfectly aware of what's around them, because they might have cars whooshing by and the odd siren or birds tweeting, and getting them to absorb all that as well as listen to my voice. And we'll go through this. And I talk them through entering the cinema, and I talk with them. I said, are you standing outside the cinema? I go, yeah. So I want you to walk through. And long story short, because it does take about 45 minutes and I'm not going to do that. It'll take me a couple of minutes to explain. So I'll get them into the cinema, I get them seated, they go through the foyer, they haven't got to pay, they can pick up the popcorn if they want. And they sit down, and there's nobody in the cinema except them, him, her, and there's just a screen. And they look up at the screen, and they're going to roll the film, and it's all about their life. And then whatever their trauma is, they're going to go through it, and we're going to watch that film about them watching themselves. And then this is where it gets weird. You can get an out-of-body experience. And I said, what I want you to do now is leave your body watching that film. And if you look behind you, you can see the projector room. And I want you to walk up there, but you still got to be looking at the film. So I want them to walk up to the projector room, and they could see a projector running around, flickering away. There's nobody in there. And then there's a little peephole. I said, go and have a look through the peephole, and then look at the peephole, and they can see themselves watching themselves. This is weird, isn't it? But don't forget, they're on kind of a very low hypnosis there, and they're living this moment. They're watching themselves through the peephole, watching themselves on the screen. And we're talking. I said, how do you feel? I said, I don't like this film. I said, no, but can you notice the way you're sitting? They're slumped down. They don't really want to watch it, but they are. And I said, look, turn your attention to the projector, and they look at it. I said, see that film? I want you to rip it off and destroy it. Absolutely. In whatever way you want to do it. You can set fire to it, you can jump on it, you can blow it up. And they do all that and then get them to pick up another reel. And I said, this film is all about you. You're going to make a film about you, how you want to be. You get the film going, and it started going, and they go back to the peephole. And I said, can you see? And it's all, everything the opposite of the way they behaved. And they notice that themselves are starting to look forward at the film, going, I like this film. I said, go back down, come out of the projector room, go back down and get back into your body. And now they're full on watching their film that they like. And we're changing lots of things. It could be a bit of a sunny day. And I said, let's make it more sunny, brighten it all up, and make all the feelings better and stronger. Eventually, we get to the anchor point, we anchor it, and I say, in your own time, I want you to walk out of the cinema. So I've installed this anchor of them watching the film on how they wanted to behave. But the thing is, I've left the film running. So if they ever have a difficult point, even with the anchor, they can just sit in a quiet place and go back into the cinema and watch that film again because it's still running. And it's a very good technique for people that are totally focused, who could bring up, visualize, I should say.
Thanks for tuning in to Man, A Quest to Find Meaning. If today's conversation sparked something in you, take a moment to reflect, then take a step. Remember, real growth comes from action, not just insight. If you found value in this episode, share it with a friend, leave a review, or reach out and let me know what resonated. Your feedback helps shape the journey we're on together. For more conversations like this, make sure to subscribe and stay connected. You can also follow me on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn for updates, tools, and upcoming guests. Remember, it's not about having the answers, it's about daring to look.